Good day students, and welcome to this overview video for assignment 3. You will see on this page that we have a few videos for this assignment. The reason for this is that the methodology of a study is specific to that study. This is to say, each study will have a unique methodology that is specifically designed to answer that study's research questions, aims, and objectives. You should all watch this video, but thereafter, you need not watch every other video. You can if you want to, but you need only watch those videos that are applicable to the methodology that you will apply. Okay, so let's get back to this video, or virtual class if you will, which speaks to the requirements of assignment 3. First things first, let's recap where we are in the research process. In the assignment that you just finished, your literature assignment, you stated how other researchers went about researching before what you are researching now. Prior to that, you made it clear exactly what it was that you were researching by offering an introduction and overview to your research. In essence, you told your readers what you will be focusing on in your study. In this first assignment, you focused on the what your research will be all about. Now you will answer the how your study will conduct its empirical research. You will tell your readers what your method will be. This is where methodology comes in. Alright, so you will see in Tutorial Letter 101 that there are 3 aspects that you need to specifically focus on in this study. These are the basic requirements for the assignment. If there are other aspects that you feel are important to clarify for your methodology, please do so. Your supervisor will advise you in their feedback on whether or not these were needed. Before you get to the 3 aspects that are the minimum requirements, you need to recap what your research is about by stating overtly once again what your research problem statement or question is and what your objectives are for this study. You already mentioned these in assignment 1, but you need to overtly state them here again. This is because this chapter will revolve around how you intend to answer your research questions. So, in answer to the methodology employed for your research questions or statements, you will focus on 3 things in this assignment. First, you will unpack your study's ontology and epistemology, thereafter its research design, and lastly, its research methodology. Now, you will see in your tutorial letter that this last aspect has some sub-requirements. You need to clearly discuss what your data collection methods and techniques will be, what your populations are, and how you will sample from them, how you will analyze the data that you gathered from your population, and in what time dimension you will complete this. Lastly, what the limitations are that are tied to the methodological choices that you executed in this study. So let's focus on all of these things right now. Okay, so let's start with the big picture, your ontology and epistemology. As you would have learned in previous and other honors modules, your ontological and epistemological stance influences everything that you do in research. It's almost like the old joke about seeing half a glass of water as either half full if you're an optimist or half empty if you're a pessimist. What you see and how you report on it is influenced by what you believe to be true about the world. In essence, this is what ontology and epistemology speaks to. Ontology is what you believe the world and reality to be, while epistemology is what you feel can be known about it. Methodology then relates to that by employing techniques that speak to what you believe can be known about the world. This really is just a general and very pedestrian overview of these concepts. I do not speak to them in depth as this has been covered in your other modules. You will, of course, also elaborate from your research and reading on all of these concepts. What I do want you to remember here is that your ontological and epistemological stance does not stand isolated to all other aspects of your methodology. No, it actually influences and informs all that you do in your empirical and conceptual research. For example, and this really is just an example, if you have a positivistic ontological and epistemological stance, we would expect more quantitative designs for your empirical study. On the other hand, if you are more interpretivistic in your stances, we would expect to see more qualitative designs feature, as you would need to employ methods that speak to interpreting the phenomenon in question. Please make sure you know enough about your chosen stance to follow it through to its logical conclusion within your research. You must showcase your understanding in this way. Good. Now let's look at all of those things that are influenced by ontology and epistemology and that are also required in this assignment. Those are by names your research design, your data collection methods and techniques, your data analysis methods and techniques, your population and sampling, as well as your study's time dimension and limitations. The first one's connection is quite obvious. Under research design, you will speak about the qualitative and/or qualitative nature of your study. Now, right from the onset, I want to remind you of an important aspect for this assignment. Throughout your discussions, you need to maintain a balance between theory and application. For all research terms that you make use of in your discussion, start off with a theoretical contextualization and definition or discussion. Then, however, move on to show how your study specifically relates to that. In that, do not just state what qualitative and quantitative designs are, for example. No, discuss in depth how your study is one or the other or both, and why. Always motivate your methodological choices and discuss how these concepts take shape in your study. Over and above that, you need to be mindful throughout of your stated ontological and epistemological stance. Here, I recommend the undergraduate book by Deploy that many of you should still have in your bookcases somewhere. On page 36 and 37, there's a table that links some of the stances with qualitative and quantitative approaches. Have a look at it to get started. Make sure you consult more robust sources than just this one, obviously. This is just to give you an idea of the link and the concept that we want you to take note of. Good. Let us move on then to data collection methods and techniques. Now, depending on your chosen design, you will have one or more data collection methods. The most often used methods are questionnaires, interviews, and textual analyses. Again, here you should be guided by what you learned in previous years of study or other honors modules. You should also have a look at other videos uploaded to this page. What I want us to stand still at for a moment is the mistakes or problems most associated with these forms of data collection techniques. We will have a look at each of these three. Before we do, however, I want you to turn up the volume of your device and listen closely. Your submission of Assignment 3 should include a first draft of your data collection instruments. For example, a first draft of your questionnaire, your interview schedule, or your coding sheet in the case of text analyses. Whatever instrument is appropriate to your chosen design and data collection technique, it must be included. Okay, let's get back to the three data collection methods and let's start with questionnaires. The most often used form of questionnaires are those that make use of neutral statements as items and then employ a Likert type scale to test them. Along with these items, you should also have a section that asks about the demographics of your respondents, and it might look something like this. Now, there are 4 golden rules when it comes to questionnaires, and this is something that many students get wrong. Even if you're not employing questionnaires in COM4809, please listen up so that you know about this in future. Firstly, you should avoid negatively phrased questions at all costs. It's confusing to your respondents. See this example that I have here. Now, if I say no to this, what am I actually saying no to? And if I say yes, what am I actually saying yes to? Furthermore, when you interpret negatively phrased items, you would need to inverse the scale because a negative response to a negative question is actually positive. As you can see, there are many problems, and these negatively phrased items are problematic in many ways. Please do avoid them. Next, you should avoid vaguely phrased items. See, for example, this item. So I might feel that, yes, my supervisor says hello to me every morning, but he doesn't really talk to me otherwise. How would I then answer this question? Be as clear as you can be in all of your items. It should be obvious to your respondents what you mean by your items. Likewise, please avoid double-barreled items at all times. Each item should only ask one thing. In my example over here, I have two things. What if a person does feel isolated, but not necessarily confused? Another aspect that comes into play here is metaphoric, abstract, or symbolic language. They are not only vague, but ambiguous, and symbolic language can actually mean different things to different people. Avoid them. Lastly, avoid qualifiers in your items. Nuances should be left for the scale, not the item. Alright, what about interviews? Well, interviews lend themselves a little more to interpretation and clarification since you have your participant right in front of you. This is why we most often see semi-structured interviews. Such interviews allow for follow-up questions and clarifications. Be sure to still pertinently ask for demographical aspects in your interviews. Do not assume that you know everything there is to know about a person just on sight. The biggest mistake that novice researchers make when doing interviews is that they ask too many questions or plan too many questions. Remember, you still have to transcribe everything, and this can become really cumbersome if you have 5 interviews of, let's say, 2 hours long each. Your participants also become fatigued, and you will get shorter, less meaningful answers if you do this. Keep your interviews shorter and deeper. We can say the same for textual responses. Be sure to sensibly limit your data so that it does not become too much to interpret. The first point is thus to sensibly demarcate your study. Decide what you will include and what you will exclude in your search and interpretation of texts. You cannot interpret everything ever written about Paul Pottinger, for example, so you should not even try. Make it clear what your plan is, what you will search for, and what you will include in your study. Perhaps a time dimension and a sensible demarcation of the type of textual sources you will include. Define them. What kind of sources will you use? Remember that your decisions in terms of your demarcations need to make sense for your study. You cannot think to answer your research questions if the data that you include has nothing to do with them. Think about the aims and motivations of your research first when you make these decisions. It will then also be easy for you to motivate your choices, and motivate you must in all academic studies. Good. Now, some of the aspects that we talked about here already links to my next point. Let's quickly talk about data analysis. In this chapter, you have to make it clear to your readers how you will analyze the data that you glean from your data collection techniques. You do not have to actually analyze any data yet. That is what the next and final assignment does. What you do here is indicate your plan, how you will go about doing it. When you outline this, make sure to discuss your methodology around analysis in depth. Don't just mention your data analysis method, for example, thematic content analysis. Actually discuss it. Also remember that if you are employing more than one data collection technique, chances are that you will have more than one data analysis technique as well. You will not be able to interpret questionnaires in the same way that you interpret interviews, right? Now, that's just an example, but I want you to remember this point. Again, linking all of your discussions and choices back to your study's aims and objectives is very important. You should keep in mind what you are trying to do, what you should be focusing on in terms of your research questions. Ask yourself constantly if what you are doing will help you answer your research questions and if it makes sense to the grander scheme of your project. Nothing that does not make sense should be included in your final work. Okay, now next, let's look at sampling. You have to make it clear what your research population is. In order to define that, you will need to be clear on what your units of analysis are. If your units of analysis are media reports, for example, your population will be the collection of reports that you will draw from to analyze. In my example on screen here, my units of analysis are people, individuals, as would be the case if I were to hold interviews, for example. Now, from the broader, larger population, I need to ascertain who or what I will target, my target population. Remember, I told you guys that you need to limit the scope of your research by demarcating your data? Well, that means that you will target a specific portion of your population so as to not end up with too much data. Also, you will discuss that process here. Next, you will say from your target population to how many people or things you will have access to. Think about tweets, for example. You might not have access to all tweets about Bell Pottinger because some tweets are too old and will no longer be accessible. Lastly, you will make it clear what your sampling procedure was to select the individual cases that you include in your research, be that people, reports, tweets, or whatever. Make it clear what your population parameters are that ruled in and ruled out whom you included and selected. Again, like with all other aspects before, you need to forward a theoretical and applied discussion wherein you motivate all the choices that you made. Good. Now, lastly, I want us to talk about your study's time dimension and its limitations. Now, listen carefully because students often get this wrong. Your time dimension does not speak about your plan for completing your research. No, it talks about the cross-sectional or longitudinal nature thereof. Since you have just a few months to complete your research, and since you are only doing your measurements in one point in time and not over a period of time, your studies will be cross-sectional. You should be able to discuss this sensibly from literature and in an applied manner. So too should your discussions on limitations show to what extent the choices that you executed influences the outcome of your research, the findings that it will produce. Now, we demarcate our research and we execute various choices because we want to make sure that our study is feasible. So a big culprit when it comes to limitations is feasibility. Make sure in your discussions to show how you will limit or overcome your limitations and still offer sound, rigorous findings at the end of the day. Okay, so that's the whole story in a nutshell. As you can see, there is a lot for you to research and many things that you need to read up on. Make sure that you start your work early. For the last thing that I want to mention, you will need to turn up your volume once again because I want to make sure that you guys hear this. Your third assignment must include an ethical clearance form. You will be penalized severely if you do not include it. This form can be found on My UNISA under additional resources. Please discuss with your supervisor any concerns that you might have with regards to the ethics of your research. It is important that you do so. Okay, so that is it from me for now. Be sure to check out all other videos that we posted for you and good luck with your assignment.